And welcome to our second course on programming. We are going to go ahead and get ready to dive deeper into looking at how to program in Java. But before we do, we first need to go ahead and do a quick review, a quick refresher of some of our high-level programming 1 concepts, just so that we make sure that we have a good, strong foundation moving forward. Now, the first thing I want to review with you is variables. So if you recall with variables, the big thing here is that Java is using these typically to represent some kind of unknown value. Or it is a known value, but we want the program to store it. All right, these are typically declared and initialized to some value, though this is not always the case. When we do make our variables, we're always going to give them something relevant. All right, we're not just going to call it like variable x, for example. Instead, it'll be something more like pressure value. All right, and it's going to follow camel casing. So, for example, you see pressure value, and you can see the V is capitalized here. All right, which is just kind of like the hump of a camel here. If I had another word, let's say pressure value amount, I could put amount here, affix the end, and the A would be capitalized. We're not going to use, for example, underscores in between our variable names. This is the most common convention you see with Java. Now, the types of variables that we will see are, of course, are ints, doubles, chars, and bools. And remember, ints are going to be your whole numbers, doubles will be decimal, char are a single character, and a bool, of course, is true or false. Similarly, we are going to also have to deal with precedence. All right, variables follow typically an arithmetic or operations with parentheses having the highest precedence. Generally speaking, our orders of operations are going to move left to right. So with that in mind, if I had an expression such as x plus parentheses x times 2 times parentheses 3 minus x, close parenthesis, plus 7, the value 3 minus x would be evaluated first because it is on the innermost parenthesis. That would mean then whatever I get out of 3 minus x, then the next step would be to take x times 2 times whatever that evaluated to. That would be my second step there. Now there are other precedence rules besides just addition, subtraction, multiplication, parentheses for things such as like and, or if we want to get further in, we get equals to, not equals to. But again, we're going to review those at a later point because that's going to be a lot more relevant when we look at things like conditionals and branching statements. All right, type conversion. Can't talk about variables without talking about type conversion. Recall that Java will automatically convert int types to double in certain situations. So what does this mean? Well, it means that we can't do it in the reverse, all right? Because remember, ints are much more precise than a double. And if we want to actually get those two kind to talk to each other, we have to either typecast or coerce them. And in order to do that, we add parentheses before the value we want to do that with. So here's an example to kind of demonstrate that. Int num1 equals 1, num2 equals 2, double answer, parentheses, double num1 equals num2. Let's just go hop over to Eclipse real quick and see an example of this, maybe with some different numbers. All right, so here I am in Eclipse, and I'm just going to go ahead and fire up in here some quick code. So let's just make like int num1. And I'm going to set that equal to 1. Num2, I'm going to set equal to 2. And let's go ahead and create some doubles. So double number 1. And I'm not going to give that one a value right now, but let's say number 2. And we're going to set that one equal to 2. And let's go ahead and create a value for number 1. So we say number 1 is equal to num1 plus number 2. Notice here I am adding an int and a double, which means I should expect that if I were to print the out number 1, that when I run this program, I should expect this to be a double type. So if I run this, we get 3.0, which means this is a double type. Now, if I were to change this number 1, let's say to num1 plus num2, just to see, now we're adding two integers, we notice we still get 3.0, and that's because, again, number 1 is a double type. Where we might run into things if I were to create something, let's say num3, and let's just go ahead and change this to num3 here for a second. All right, and change that to num3. And I would run this one. Notice now we have an integer number. We just have 3. Now, if I say num3 and say, hey, I want this to be number 1 plus num2, and I run this one, oh, we got an error in our code. And that's because, again, number 1 is what type? Oh, it's a decimal. And also, if you look at it, we haven't really given this a value. So let me just really go ahead and give this a value real quick. And even with the value here, it doesn't fix it. So this is where the typecasting is going to come into play. So I'm just going to put in parentheses here, int. And what that's going to do is it's going to take whatever value is in number 1 here. So even if I made this, let's say 1.5, it's going to convert that over into an integer. So if we save and run this, we now get the integer value of 3 because it took 1.5, found the integer value of that, which would just be 1, and then just added it as normal. All right, the other thing we need to talk about, of course, is strings. And if you recall, with strings, they are not a primitive type in Java, but are actually objects of a class called string with a capital S. Now, we create string objects very similar to how we do variables in that we declare and initialize them in most scenarios. So string values have to be within open and closed parentheses in order for Java to recognize what their value is. If I just say like string name equals my name and I don't put quotes around my name, I'm probably going to get an error. Additionally, when we start dealing with strings, we have to deal with something called concatenation. So if I want to join a string value with a variable, for example, we can concatenate the two using the plus operator. System.println, outputting the value of num1 plus num2. And notice, outputting the value of num1 is in quotes, so that is a string in there. Num1 is probably a variable defined someplace up in our program. And one other thing I want to point out is that you'll notice that between the colon and the closing quote mark, we have an extra space here. And that's because if I don't put that space there, remember your variable value will be joined to wherever you last left that quote out. So if you don't put a extra space in there, it's going to be fixed on there pretty well. Additionally, remember that if we try to concatenate two variables of a number, it might instead do the arithmetic operation. So if I had done this same line of code, but instead I said num1 plus num2, and I put num1 plus num2 in parentheses, it's probably going to add them. Very similar, we also have something called string methods, and because that string object is a class, we can use methods that are defined within that string class to obtain or modify the value of the string object. Of course, some common ones are things like length, strim, char@, equals ignore case, to upper, and to lower. Just remember that if we want to modify the original string, we need to set the method call equal to that original string. Merely calling the method or outputting it will not modify the string in any way. All right, so let's just see some of those strings here in action. So let's just go ahead and create a string, and I'm just going to call it first string. And I'm going to go ahead and have this just equal hello universe. And maybe we create a second string. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and fix this to the end. And we'll call this the sum of two numbers is, and make sure I put that space there. And if we go ahead and print this, let's do system out.println, and I'm just going to do first string plus the second string, and let's do a second one here, but let's now fix this with variables. System.out.println, let's do the second string plus, let's do num3. And we save that and give it a run. You will see we got 3. We got hello universe, the sum of two numbers is, and we have the sum of two numbers is 3. Notice right here with hello universe and the sum of, because I didn't affix a space in here, I didn't put a space in here, that I had these two strings joined right next to each other. Now there's two ways I can solve this. I can of course just come up here and add another space to hello universe, or I can concatenate in a space character here, and that would of course solve that. Now remember, we do also have something called the empty string that we do want to kind of remember. Empty strings, remember, are just real simple to remember, so I'm just calling this string empty string just so you can demonstrate this. And remember, an empty string is just an open and closed parentheses. Technically, the string has a value. It's just, it has an empty string. It's not nothing. It's just an empty string. And sometimes this is really handy when we want to initialize a string to something, but we don't want it to have a value right away. Because I just do string empty string, yeah, this will work just fine. But sometimes when we run code, it might say, hey, you need to initialize this to some value. So then in that case, we can just set it to an empty string.